It was the summer of 1993, and I had no choice. I was broke, living in a tiny cabin in the mountains of Montana with no running water and no way to get home. My boyfriend, just as broke, hadn't given me a penny for a bus ticket. My parents were furious with me, and I didn't have a phone to call anyone for help. Hitchhiking was the only option, and for the first time, I'd have to do it alone. It scared me, but I couldn't wait any longer. School had already started, and I was 2 days late. With my backpack ready, I set out with nothing but my ID and hoped that someone would be kind enough to give me a lift. At first, things were going better than I could have imagined. An elderly couple stopped right away and took me halfway to my destination, dropping me off near the border. I crossed on foot and was immediately picked up by a man who seemed nice enough but gave me a slight chill. He spent the whole ride lecturing me about how dangerous it was for someone like me to hitchhike alone. He even said I reminded him of his daughter. Luckily, he dropped me off safely, and I thought maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. I still had a long way to go, but I felt like luck was on my side. But then, things slowed down. I stood on the side of the road for hours, waiting for the next ride. The road stretched out ahead, endless and uncertain. I was completely on my own now, and the weight of that reality hit me. Hitchhiking alone wasn't something I had ever planned to do, but life doesn't always give you easy choices. My boyfriend hadn't come through with any money, and I had no one else to turn to. The cabin I was living in felt a world away from everything. No running water, no phone, and no way to call for help. My only option was to thumb a ride from strangers and hope I'd make it back home safely. It was a desperate situation, but I had no choice. I had to go. I remember feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve as I walked away from that cabin and out onto the open road. The sun was hot, the day dragging on, and every step I took felt like a gamble. Would anyone stop for me? Would they be safe? It was the kind of fear that you bury deep down, because what else can you do? There was no other way to get to. With no other options left, I stood by the side of the road, my thumb out, hoping someone would stop. It was a strange feeling being completely alone, depending on strangers to get me where I needed to go. I had never hitchhiked by myself before, and the weight of that decision pressed on me. But there was no turning back. I needed to get home, and this was the only way. As I walked along, bag slung over my shoulder, the first car approached. My heart raced, not knowing who was behind the wheel. Luckily, it was an older couple, kind and talkative. They didn't seem threatening at all, and I breathed a little easier as they gave me a ride most of the way. They dropped me off near the border, and I crossed it on foot, still feeling lucky that everything had gone so smoothly. But I knew that my journey wasn't over yet. I still had hours of road ahead of me, and nothing but my thumb and the hope that someone else would stop. Every time a car passed by without slowing down, a pit formed in my stomach. This was the reality of hitchhiking. You just didn't know what was coming next. As I continued down the road, things seemed to be going well. The sun was still high, and the day felt strangely peaceful. I hadn't been waiting long for my next ride, but something unsettling broke that calm. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned my head and saw it a dark, thin snake struggling to make its way over the cement guardrail. At first, I didn't think much of it. The snake wasn't large or particularly threatening, and I even felt a bit sorry for it as it awkwardly tried to climb over the barrier. Using a stick I found nearby, I helped it along, tossing it over the wall to the other side. But as I continued walking, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Maybe I should have taken that snake as a sign of warning that my luck was about to change. But in that moment, I brushed it off and kept moving, unaware of the danger that was coming next. Not long after the snake encounter, I saw another car slow down ahead of me. My heart sank a little when I noticed it was just a man driving, but then I saw a kid in the passenger seat, around 12 or 13 years old. That eased my nerves. It felt safer with a child in the car. What could go wrong? The man seemed friendly enough. He introduced the boy as his nephew and said they were driving across the country, heading to St. Louis. He was talkative, making small jokes and telling stories about his family. The kid, though, barely said a word, just sitting quietly, which made me a little uneasy, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We were on Highway 90, and I realized I was lucky this road would take me all the way to my town. It felt like another stroke of good fortune. I settled into the ride, grateful I wouldn't have to thumb it again, at least not for a while. But something about the man's overly friendly nature started to nag at me. I couldn't quite place it, but there was a shift in the air, and I was about to find out just how wrong I was to ignore that gut feeling. At first, everything seemed normal as we drove. The man kept up a steady stream of conversation, talking about his family and asking general questions about me. I tried to stay polite, answering without giving too much away. But then, slowly, the questions began to change. What started as harmless small talk took a darker turn. He asked if I had a boyfriend, which seemed innocent enough, but then he kept pushing for details. What's he like? Turned into, what do you guys do for fun? And then into things I didn't want to answer. His questions were getting personal, too personal, and I could feel the tension in the car rising. I tried to stay calm, laughing nervously and pretending to go along with his chatter, but inside I was starting to panic. The boy in the passenger seat stayed silent, staring out the window, like he wasn't even there. My heart pounded harder with each question, and I could tell that the man wasn't just being curious, he was testing me. His eyes flickered over to me as he asked about my relationship, as if gauging how much he could get away with. I gripped the switchblade my boyfriend had given me, hidden in my sleeve, and forced myself to play along, while trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. The ride that once felt like a lucky break was quickly turning into a nightmare. The more the man talked, the more obvious it became that he wasn't going to let this go. His casual questions turned into outright demands. He hinted that I would need to pay him back for the ride, and then he dropped the act completely. He expected sex in exchange. My mind raced as I tried to hide my fear. I needed to get away, but we were still miles from my town, and every minute felt like another step deeper into danger. I forced myself to stay calm, my hands sweating as I clutched the knife hidden in my sleeve. I couldn't just jump out of the car, he'd catch me in an instant, and the kid was still sitting silently in the front seat. Then, an idea came to me. I smiled at him, pretending I was going along with his plan. I told him I had a friend back in town who'd be perfect for his nephew, and that we could meet her once we got there. He bought it. I casually suggested we stop for drinks on the way to celebrate our upcoming double date. I directed him to a gas station just a few blocks from where I lived, all while keeping my voice steady. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. As soon as he parked and went inside to grab the beer, I seized my chance. I bolted out of the car, sprinting down an alley, heart pounding, not daring to look back. I ducked into some bushes, hiding, barely breathing, praying he wouldn't find me. I crouched in the bushes, heart racing, every muscle tense. The sun was still out, but I felt the weight of the shadows closing in around me. I could hear the man shouting, his voice sharp with anger, as he searched for me. Every second felt like an eternity. I kept expecting to hear his footsteps coming closer, but they never did. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, afraid that even the sound of my heartbeat would give me away. Minutes turned into hours as I hid, too terrified to move. His car never came down the alley, but the fear of him finding me kept me rooted in place. Eventually, as the sky began to darken and the streets emptied, I worked up the courage to slip out of the bushes and make my way home. I ran the whole way, not stopping until I was safely inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were still shaking, and my roommate's shocked face was the last thing I saw before I collapsed. I was covered in dirt and leaves, but all I could think about was how close I had come to something far worse. Sitting in the safety of my home, the weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. I couldn't stop shaking. My roommate asked what had happened, but I could barely speak. I told her the short version, still too rattled to go into detail. She couldn't believe I had gone through something like that and asked why I hadn't called her for help. I had no answer, just the lingering thought that it could have ended much worse. As the days passed, I found myself replaying the events over and over in my mind. Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted with fear. I knew I'd never forget the way that man's smile shifted from friendly to menacing, or how helpless I'd felt sitting in his car. It became one of those stories you carry with you, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. Whenever hitchhiking comes up, I think of that day, the fear, the escape, and the lesson learned: don't ever rely on the kindness of strangers when your life is on the line. That ride could have been my last, but somehow I got away. I haven't forgotten the terror, and I never will. Story 2. Nikki was one of those rare souls you meet in life, kind-hearted and always willing to lend a hand. Growing up in a small town, she believed in helping others, always looking for ways to make the world a little brighter. She had a warm smile that could instantly ease anyone's worries. But one story from her younger years would stick with me as a cautionary tale, a reminder that not everyone had the same good intentions. It was in the early 1980s, when she was in her mid-20s, that Nikki found herself on a drive into the city. The road was long, and the trees lined the highway like silent witnesses. It was during this drive that she spotted a man walking along the roadside, his thumb out in the universal sign of hitchhiking. Most people would have driven past without a second thought, but Nikki was different. Her instinct to help kicked in, and she pulled over, ready to give him a ride. Little did she know that this decision would lead to a chilling revelation. As Nikki approached the hitchhiker, she felt a mix of compassion and curiosity. He seemed polite, almost shy, as he leaned into her open window. "Thank you for stopping," he said, his voice soft but steady. She smiled and welcomed him into her car, feeling good about her choice. After all, she had always been taught to help those in need, and this man looked like he could use a break. Once he climbed in, Nikki offered him a warm drink from her thermos, which he accepted with a grateful nod. They started chatting, discussing the usual small talk about the weather and the journey ahead. He told her he was traveling to the city to see some friends and that he was short on cash. Nikki felt a pang of sympathy for him. After all, everyone faces tough times, and she was happy to be part of the solution, if only for a little while. It was this kindness that fueled her trust, leading her to believe she was simply helping a fellow human being on his way. Little did she know, danger often hides behind a friendly smile. As the car rolled down the highway, the atmosphere inside was light and friendly. Nikki found herself enjoying the conversation more than she expected. The man spoke about his hometown, sharing stories about his life, and his eyes sparkled with a hint of excitement. He seemed genuine, and she felt a connection growing between them, however brief it might be. They exchanged laughs over silly anecdotes, and the miles passed quickly. Nikki appreciated his easygoing nature, which made the long drive feel shorter. She asked him about his family, and he spoke fondly of them, painting a picture of a tight-knit group who would be thrilled to see him again. With each mile, her initial caution faded, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. It felt good to be helping someone out, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made the right decision by stopping for him. But as they continued down the road, Nikki started to notice subtle changes in his demeanor. There were fleeting moments when his smile faltered, and she sensed a shadow lurking just beneath the surface of his friendly exterior. She brushed it off, convincing herself that she was simply overthinking. After all, she was just being a good Samaritan. Yet, a small voice in her head began to whisper warnings, urging her to stay vigilant as they journeyed further together. After a while, they decided to take a break at a small diner along the way. Nikki felt a bit peckish and offered to buy him dinner, wanting to show her kindness. The man hesitated for a moment, looking slightly embarrassed, but Nikki insisted, assuring him it was no trouble at all. She thought it would be nice to share a meal together, to bond over food and laughter before they continued their journey. Inside the diner, they settled into a booth, and the smell of fresh coffee and greasy fries filled the air. Nikki ordered a hearty meal for both of them, enjoying the chance to nourish her hitchhiking companion. As they ate, the man seemed more relaxed, grateful for her generosity. He thanked her repeatedly, a look of surprise on his face as he savored every bite. The warmth of the moment made Nikki feel good. She loved that she could help someone who seemed to be down on his luck, and she smiled at him, her heart swelling with compassion. Little did she know, this act of kindness would have consequences she could never have imagined. The man's gratitude was genuine, but his thoughts were far darker than she realized. As they finished their meal and returned to the car, Nikki felt a growing sense of camaraderie, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As they neared the city, the mood in the car was still light. Nikki felt a sense of accomplishment, happy that she had helped someone during her drive. The man chatted excitedly about what he planned to do once he arrived, and she listened intently, genuinely interested in his stories. It was hard to believe how quickly the miles had passed and how they had connected over just a few shared experiences. When they finally reached their destination, Nikki pulled into a bustling downtown area. The streets were alive with activity, and the lights twinkled against the evening sky. As they parked, the man turned to her, a serious expression crossing his face. "I really appreciate everything you've done for me," he said, sincerity in his voice. "I'd love to stay in touch." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, asking Nikki for her phone number. Surprised but flattered, she wrote it down for him, excited at the prospect of forming a friendship. As he thanked her once more, she felt a warm sense of pride. Maybe this would turn into something meaningful, an unexpected connection formed through a simple act of kindness. As he climbed out of the car, Nikki waved goodbye, feeling good about her day. But as she drove away, a nagging thought brushed against her mind. Did she really know this man? Was it wise to share her number so freely? She dismissed it, eager to focus on the positives of the encounter, completely unaware of the dark twist that lay ahead. A week passed, and Nikki had almost forgotten about her hitchhiking passenger. Life had returned to normal, and the memory of their encounter seemed like nothing more than a fleeting moment in time. But one evening, her phone rang unexpectedly. When she answered, the familiar voice on the other end sent a chill down her spine. It was the man she had picked up. Before she could even say hello, he launched into a rapid confession. His tone was calm, almost too calm, as he told her that when he first got into her car, he had every intention of harming her. He described in disturbing detail how he had planned to assault and murder her at the pit stop, then steal her car and leave her body somewhere along the road. The air seemed to freeze around her as he spoke, his words hitting her like a punch to the gut. But then, his voice softened, and he thanked her. He told her that it was her kindness, her generosity, and the way she treated him with respect that made him change his mind. He said he couldn't bring himself to hurt someone who had shown him such compassion. Nikki listened in shock, her mind racing as she realized just how close she had come to a horrific fate. That simple phone call turned her good deed into something much darker, a terrifying reminder that not everyone's intentions are as innocent as they appear. As the man continued to speak, Nikki's heart raced, and she struggled to process his chilling words. He described how her kindness had affected him, as if it was a light shining through his darkness. In that moment of deciding her fate, he realized he didn't want to live with the guilt of hurting someone who had treated him so well. It was as if her genuine compassion had struck a chord deep within him, forcing him to reconsider his actions. Nikki felt a mix of relief and disbelief. She had never expected her simple act of generosity to have such profound consequences. His gratitude, although unsettling, served as a testament to the power of kindness, a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, compassion can spark change. She had saved her own life not through fear, but by being a decent human being. Yet, as she hung up the phone, the weight of his confession lingered in the air. It made her realize how fragile life is and how easily things can turn from good to bad. The experience left her shaken, but also determined to be more cautious. She understood that while kindness is important, so is self-protection. The phone call had changed her view on helping others. She would always carry this story with her, a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes even a kind heart can be met with hidden danger. In the aftermath of that unsettling phone call, Nikki found herself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The experience haunted her thoughts, reminding her of how a simple decision to help someone in need had nearly cost her everything. It left her feeling a mixture of gratitude and fear, forever altering her perspective on kindness and trust. She shared the story with friends and family, emphasizing the importance of being cautious, even when helping others. Nikki wanted everyone to understand that while it's good to be generous, it's equally vital to protect oneself from potential harm. Each retelling of her experience served as a lesson, warning others to be aware of the dangers that can hide behind a friendly facade. The encounter taught her that compassion can have a powerful impact, but it must be balanced with awareness and caution. As she moved forward in life, Nikki remained committed to being kind to others, but she also learned to trust her instincts. She understood that sometimes kindness alone isn't enough to keep you safe. Every act of goodwill carried a risk, and being mindful of that risk was a necessary part of her journey. Ultimately, Nikki emerged from this experience a little wiser and a lot more vigilant, forever carrying the lesson that even in a world filled with kindness, danger can lurk just beneath the surface. Story 3. The night felt suffocating, filled with tension and fear. I had just spent an exhausting evening at a party, only to return home to my boyfriend, who was waiting for me with a storm brewing in his eyes. It was the kind of look that made my stomach drop, a silent warning that the night was about to take a dark turn. His jealousy had flared up, and I could sense the anger simmering beneath the surface. As soon as I walked through the door, things escalated quickly. He was furious over something trivial, a misunderstanding that could have been resolved with a simple conversation. Instead, he lashed out, his words sharp and cutting. I tried to calm him down, but every attempt only seemed to fuel his rage. I felt trapped, caught in a cycle of fear and confusion. I had been in this situation before, but tonight felt different, more intense and dangerous. Eventually, in a fit of anger, he threw me onto the porch, locking the door behind him. I was left outside, pleading for him to let me back in, but he turned off the lights, leaving me in darkness. Alone and vulnerable, I realized that I had no phone, no wallet, and no way to call for help. The cold air wrapped around me like a shroud, and panic began to set in. I was stuck in a nightmare, desperate to escape, but not knowing how to make that happen. With no other options, I felt a rush of desperation wash over me. I stood on the porch, shivering in the chilly night air, my heart racing with fear. I knew I had to leave. The thought of staying out here, helpless and alone, was unbearable. I glanced around, searching for a sign of hope, but all I saw was darkness and silence. Deciding to walk to the nearby gas station felt like my only choice. I didn't want to knock on a neighbor's door. The thought of waking anyone up felt like a betrayal to my boyfriend, even though he was the one who had pushed me out. The cold seeped into my bones as I stepped away from the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm, but the chill wasn't just from the night air. It was the icy grip of fear and uncertainty that made my stomach turn. The gas station was just under a mile away, but in the darkness, that distance felt like a lifetime. I set off, my heart pounding as I walked along the deserted street. Every rustle in the bushes and every shadow made me jump. I felt exposed, like a target waiting for something bad to happen. As I moved further away from home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving behind a piece of myself, one that would be hard to reclaim. I had to keep moving, I had to find help. As I walked, the reality of my situation sank in deeper. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. I tried to keep my focus on the gas station, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what could happen. What if my boyfriend decided to come after me? What if I encountered someone else along the way? Each footstep echoed in the silence, amplifying my anxiety. I couldn't let fear paralyze me, so I forced myself to keep moving forward. The decision to leave felt like a leap into the unknown, but I knew staying put was not an option. I needed to reach the gas station, a place where I could use a phone and call for help. The thought of finding safety pushed me onward, despite the chilling winds that whipped around me. The darkness felt oppressive, and every rustle of leaves made my heart race. I had never walked alone at night before, and the experience was both terrifying and liberating. As I trudged along, I reminded myself of the purpose behind my journey. I was taking control of my life, stepping away from the chaos that had trapped me for so long. With every step, I felt a flicker of hope mingled with dread, knowing I had to stay alert for any sign of danger. As I continued down the road, my eyes scanned the dark surroundings, searching for any signs of life. Just then, I spotted headlights approaching in the distance. My heart raced as the tall white pickup truck slowed down beside me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should approach or keep walking. But the driver rolled down the window and smiled, presenting himself as a friendly face in the darkness. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "You shouldn't be out here alone at this hour." Something in his tone felt reassuring, a small comfort amidst the fear that clung to me. I told him I was on my way to the gas station and explained my situation as quickly as I could, my words tumbling out in a rush. I wanted to believe he could help me, that this chance encounter could lead to safety. He introduced himself as John and claimed to have just finished his shift as a police officer, which added a layer of credibility to his offer. "I can give you a ride there if you'd like," he said, his voice warm and inviting. The idea of getting off the road and into the safety of a vehicle felt like a relief, despite the gnawing doubts in the back of my mind. I hesitated, but then I climbed into the passenger seat, hoping that my instincts wouldn't lead me astray. As I settled into the truck, I tried to shake off the creeping sense of unease that clung to me. The interior was cluttered, filled with empty coffee cups and newspapers strewn across the floor. A pair of handcuffs caught my eye, partially hidden under the pile of junk, and my stomach knotted at the sight. I told myself I was overreacting, trying to convince myself that he was just a regular guy who had happened to let his vehicle get messy. After all, he had presented himself as a police officer, someone who should be trustworthy. The conversation flowed easily at first, with John asking about my situation and offering words of comfort. I shared snippets of my life, feeling a false sense of security wash over me as he nodded and smiled. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Something felt off, and I knew I should have listened to that instinct instead of brushing it aside. When he asked personal questions about my life, his tone shifted slightly, becoming more probing and intense. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized he was too interested in my responses, almost as if he was fishing for information. My heart began to race, and I wished I had stuck to my original plan of walking to the gas station. The realization that I had placed my trust in a stranger weighed heavily on me, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening as we drove further away from safety. As we drove along, the initial warmth of the conversation faded, replaced by a palpable tension. John's questions took a darker turn, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. He made comments that sent alarm bells ringing in my head, veering into territory that felt inappropriate and invasive. The friendly facade was cracking, revealing something more sinister lurking beneath. "Why were you out so late, dressed like that?" he asked, his tone laced with judgment. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment and fear. It was as if he was blaming me for being out in the first place. The air grew heavy, and I tried to deflect his questions, offering vague answers while my mind raced with possibilities of what he might do next. I could sense his gaze drifting toward me, his interest becoming predatory. When he laughed and suggested I shouldn't have been alone, a chill ran down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to get out of the car, but the dark road stretched ahead, and I knew I was trapped. I stole a glance out the window, desperately searching for any sign of the gas station, but the surroundings felt empty and isolating. I realized I had made a grave mistake, and the thought of being at the mercy of this man sent waves of panic coursing through me. I needed to find a way to escape before it was too late. The further we drove, the more my anxiety escalated. I kept glancing at the gas gauge, hoping to see it approaching empty, which would signal our arrival. But instead, we passed by the gas station without slowing down, my heart racing as dread washed over me. "Hey, I think you missed it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my words fell flat in the thickening air. He didn't respond, his grip on the steering wheel tightening as he continued down the dark road, the landscape growing more desolate. Panic surged within me as I realized I was not just lost, I was heading into a nightmare. I felt trapped, like a rabbit caught in a snare, and every instinct told me to flee. My mind raced, replaying every horror story I had ever heard about women getting picked up by strangers. The tension in the truck became unbearable, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. "Can you turn around?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I really need to get to that gas station." He glanced at me, and in that fleeting moment, I saw something cold and unfeeling in his eyes. It was a look that chilled me to the bone and confirmed my worst fears. The realization hit hard. I was in serious danger, and time was running out. I needed to think fast and find a way to escape before he decided to take me somewhere I couldn't come back from. As we drove further into the darkness, I felt a sense of urgency washing over me. The road was isolated, and the trees loomed closer, like silent witnesses to my impending doom. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing my panic. I needed a plan. The fear of what might happen if I stayed in that truck consumed me, and I realized that staying silent could be a fatal mistake. I glanced at the door handle, weighing my options. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I jump out while the truck was still moving? Would I risk injury or worse by making a break for it? But staying put felt like a death sentence. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. I needed to wait for the right moment when the truck slowed down or came to a stop. Then, without warning, John pulled off the main road onto a dirt path surrounded by dense trees. My heart sank. This was it, I could feel it in my bones. He was taking me to a secluded place where no one would hear my screams. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. As he slowed the vehicle, I seized my chance. I quickly pulled the door handle, throwing it open and launching myself out of the truck before he could react. The ground rushed up to meet me, and I rolled to absorb the impact, scrambling to my feet as I sprinted into the darkness. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, my heart racing with the fear of being caught. The gas station was my only hope, and I was determined to reach it, no matter what it took. My legs burned as I pushed myself to run faster, adrenaline fueling my escape. The night air felt cold against my skin, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I could hear the sound of John's voice growing fainter behind me, but the fear of him catching up was a relentless weight on my shoulders. I needed to reach the gas station before he could close the distance between us. As I approached the bright lights of the gas station, hope surged within me, urging me to keep going. Just as I turned to look back, I spotted the pickup truck screeching to a halt at the end of the road. Panic surged as I realized he wasn't far behind. I could see him getting out, his silhouette framed against the headlights, anger radiating off him as he yelled my name. I was nearly there, but I knew I had to act fast. I sprinted inside the gas station, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The clerk looked up, confusion etched on his face as I burst through the door. "Please, call the police," I gasped, my voice trembling. "There's a man chasing me." The clerk's eyes widened in shock as I glanced back toward the door, terrified that John would follow me inside. Just then, I heard the bell jingle as he entered, scanning the room for me. I ducked behind a row of shelves, trying to catch my breath as I kept an eye on him. My heart raced as I watched him approach the counter, his demeanor shifting from anger to a chilling calmness. I knew I had to stay hidden until help arrived. The fear coursing through my veins felt suffocating, but I couldn't give up now. I was so close to safety, and I could feel a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos, knowing that I was not alone anymore. I crouched low behind the shelves, my heart pounding as I watched John approach the counter. He spoke to the clerk, his voice steady, but I could see the tension in his body. I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't look my way. The seconds felt like hours, each heartbeat echoing in my ears as I tried to remain silent and still. Just then, the clerk's expression shifted from confusion to concern. He must have sensed something was off because he kept glancing back toward me, trying to gauge the situation. I could see John's frustration growing, and I knew that if he realized I was hiding, it would all be over. My mind raced with possibilities of what he might do next. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder. Relief flooded through me as I realized help was on the way. John must have heard it too, because his demeanor changed. He shot a glare in my direction, and I froze, willing my body to melt into the shadows. "I think you should call the police," he said, his tone casual, but there was a coldness to it that sent chills down my spine. As the sirens grew closer, I felt a surge of courage. This was my chance. I took a deep breath, ready to make my move. The clerk, sensing my urgency, gave me a subtle nod. With a burst of adrenaline, I bolted from my hiding spot toward the entrance, ignoring the world around me. I sprinted past the clerk and straight out the door, racing toward the sound of the sirens, praying they would arrive before John could catch up to me. I could see the flashing lights in the distance, and a wave of hope washed over me. I didn't look back as I sprinted toward them, fueled by the knowledge that I was finally on the brink of safety. The relief of escaping his grasp began to wash over me, and I knew I had narrowly avoided a fate that could have ended much worse. After the police arrived and took my statement, I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. The officers were professional, assuring me that I was safe now, but the reality of what had just happened still felt surreal. I could hardly process the events of the night as they gathered details, my thoughts racing with memories of John's unsettling demeanor and the fear that had gripped me. As I left the gas station, I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the chill that lingered in the air. I replayed the entire ordeal in my mind, from the moment I stepped out of my home to the heart-stopping moment I fled from the truck. It was a harsh reminder of how quickly things could turn dangerous and how naive I had been to trust a stranger so easily. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a sense of vulnerability I couldn't shake. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the experience lingered like a shadow. I found myself more cautious, constantly evaluating my surroundings and the people I encountered. My perspective on trust shifted dramatically. I realized that while kindness is essential, it must be tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism. I couldn't forget the warning signs I had ignored, the moments when my instincts had screamed at me to run. Though I was grateful to have escaped, I knew that I would carry this experience with me forever. It became a part of my story, a reminder of the importance of listening to my gut and being aware of the dangers that lurk in the world. I vowed to share my story with others, hoping to raise awareness about the risks of vulnerability and the importance of self-protection, even in the most innocent of circumstances.